All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started with our program, but please continue to enjoy the lunch. If you want more lunch, you can go get more lunch. Most people have not had a chance to visit the dessert table, and that is totally fine and appropriate and encouraged for you to visit the dessert table. But we have a lot of content today, and I don't want us to be here forever and ever because it's Sunday, so I'm going to have us go ahead and begin. I want to start by introducing John Mulder. John has been a faculty member in the department for a long time. I want to say like 30 years or something. Does that sound right?
Well, I first interacted with the department in 1982.
Okay.
And then have been hiding the shadows with the clinical appointment for most of that time.
So John has been here since before you were born, for most of you. And he's currently an associate chair, and he's also the executive director of Holland Home, where he takes care of palliative care patients and works a lot with the palliative medicine fellows in Grand Rapids. So he is going to talk with us a bit about the history of our department, and then our previous chair, Dr. Wadland, is going to follow him with more memories. So John, are you ready?
I'm ready, sure.
All right.
Well, thanks. I'm delighted to be here. As I mentioned, I first interacted with the department when I was asked to do a fellowship with OMERAD. And upon finishing that in '83, I stayed on. They asked me to take a clinical appointment so I could help with the teaching of residents and students, which I've done at some level ever since. And sort of emerged from the shadows about 4 or 5 years ago. And it really started before that when we got the fellowship program going. And then we started the division of palliative medicine here, which most people don't know yet have, but we do. And it's within the Department of Family Medicine. So we've got a book there, and then Julie had tapped me to have a more active role with with some projects and things of that sort. So it's been fun. I really have a great love for the department, and developing relationships with you all has been really meaningful for me. So I was asked to just provide just a really brief background, and so that's what I'm going to do. Basically leading up to when we first launched 50 years ago. Bill's got wonderful stories and wonderful reflections from being the chair, and so he's going to kind of fill in some of the more fun stuff. But I just wanted to give you all an idea of what it took to get this department started in the first place. So this goes back in the early 60s. There was a physician shortage, and there was an exploration of models of what they referred to as first contact medical care, which I found was an interesting nomenclature, but that's what they referred to that as, was needed in the US. In Michigan, Dusty Rhodes had outlined 8 essential steps to ensure the future of general practice, including residencies of at least 2 years duration, including operative obstetrics and surgery, and a certifying board that will attest to this new status. So that was in the early 60s. That here in Michigan, he was saying, we need more formalized training. And so there were a number of constituent groups that contributed to the conversation, and there were a lot of expectations then that came about as a result of this. They believed that family practice would be a successful competitor for medical students, first of all, and after training, family physicians would practice in medically underserved areas. What I couldn't find out, I'm curious as to why they thought that somehow our ilk would be naturally drawn to the underserved areas. Many of us are, and many of us did. Family physicians would provide the care that was personal, accessible, affordable, and sensitive to the psychosocial factors relevant to healthcare. Family practice education activities in medical school would have the effect of making medical education more relevant and humanistic. So just by infusing our values into the medical education, that all students would be better physicians and more humanistic in their outlook toward medicine. And the family practice residents would be more concerned with practical and experiential practice. Training would be based more of the real world of ambulatory care and would have aspects of apprenticeship. So pull it out of the ivory tower and make it more practical and real to the real world. Now, at about the same time, the AAMC was encouraging the development of 2-year medical schools, and that would provide medical students with the basic sciences prior to transfer to more established medical students for their clinical training. And the Kellogg Foundation here was in Michigan, was very interested in supporting those efforts. They wanted to see more training of physicians. We can do that. And since not everybody had the infrastructure to do four-year schools, if we can just create these two-year opportunities, then we'll find places for them to do their last 2 years. So Michigan State became quickly a focus for that development, but there was opposition. Not everybody was on board with this. Wayne State, MSU, or I'm sorry, U of M, which were the only medical students at the time, schools at the time, they needed funding. They wanted to expansion into their med ed and felt those commitments should be funded before they started something new. And they also felt, this is a fun fact, that Michigan State had grown too fast, was exceeding its mandate by moving into the field of medicine. Such an effort would be unlikely to succeed in a cow college, which was a direct quote. They also felt that the clinical resources in Lansing were likely inadequate to support a full medical program. In 1962, then, a resolution from Michigan legislature permitted MSU to proceed with the two-year program leading to the MD degree. But the general feeling was that MSU was planning for a college without the appropriate mandate. So legislature resolution, not legislation, just a resolution said, we think that that MSU can go ahead and do this. Of course, as you're well aware, that state resolutions carry no necessarily impact or money. So, so it happened. The MSU started a two-year program. It was designated as a college, College of Human Medicine, and Andrew Hunt became the first dean in 1964. So 60 years on is the history of our college. And there was a number of voices at that time. There were a number of voices that lobbied for an emphasis on family practice. We have the Michigan Academy of General Practice, Michigan State Medical Society, in concert with the American Academy of General Practice, National Commission on Community Health Services, Citizens Commission on GME, Ad Hoc Committee on Education for Family Practice of the Council on Medical Education. So all of these forces were saying, yeah, this is great, you guys are doing this, but what can we do to infuse the ethic of family medicine into this practice, into this new school? And it also synced with the movement to abandon the traditional rotating internship in favor of residency programs of more than 2 years duration, because up until that time, as you may or may not be aware, since as Julie said, you're all a lot younger than I am. Back in the 70s and 60s before, you always did a rotating internship. That really was the path to getting your license and ability to practice. And then some people chose to do residencies after that internship. So in the later 60s, after years of debate and negotiation, on a national level, the American Board of Family Practice was established. And that was February 8th of 1969. So that's when we officially had our specialty of family medicine. Shortly thereafter, Michigan's chapter of the American Academy of General Practice was reorganized as the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians. And the ABFP had allowed for an experiential track for board certification up through 1978. So they give about a 9-year window that docs who were in practice wanted to be board certified could become board certified. After that, 3-year residency was required. Midland and Saginaw hosted the first 2 family practice residency programs in the state. Both approved on the same date, December 3rd, 1969. And Sparrow came on board in early 1970s. Those are the first 3 residency programs here in the state. Now, despite the state community hospitals coming on board with family practice residencies, Wayne State, U of M, MSU pretty much ignored the initiatives advanced by Michigan Academy to establish departments of family practice. And Wayne State and U of M in particular were doubling down. They say, not only do we not think that's important, we're just going to completely ignore it and double down on pushing the specialty orientation of our students. Now, here at CHM, Dr. Hunt respected that CHM was developed in part to meet the growing need for primary physicians in Michigan. And again, more interested in training students for careers in first contact specialties. However, even he expressed reservations that a separate department of family practice could address the shortage of primary care docs. He just was not convinced. In January of 71, Michigan State Medical Society passed a resolution urging the development of a department. And again, this is the state side just saying we're throwing our weight behind this. despite his reservations, Dr. Hunt did establish an ad hoc committee in February of '71 to establish the feasibility of a department. The members included Pat Crow, Roy Gerard, Louis Simone, all FP residency directors at the time. And at the time, nationwide, there were only 9 family medicine departments anywhere in the country. In May of '71, again, a little bit later, both houses of the Michigan legislature passed a resolution, again, it's a resolution, authorizing the governing boards of all 3 Michigan medical schools to establish departments of family practice. And in November of that year, the ad hoc committee recommended that CHM develop an Office of Family Practice Education and Research. That might sound vaguely familiar in terms of the acronym, right? But did not recommend a full department. They said, we're not sure that we're ready for that or that we can do that, but at least let's set up this OFPR. And we offered that report and nothing happened. Okay. A year later, Dr. Hunt issued this memo, and this is quoting the memo. The report has not been the beneficiary of action from this office. The inaction is a result of a number of forces, issues, and confusions which need not be repeated in this memorandum. Suffice it to say that at the time has now come for implementation. And he proposed, well, with family medicine being fundamentally a community-based discipline, family medicine in this institution could very logically be our first department whose origins are, in fact, in the communities. And thus we began this process of developing our community relationships and other places where we could provide clinical education. Now, mid-70s, there's availability of dollars from the Kellogg Foundation. And this was part of the grant proposal, which I thought was really interesting. Whereas the proposed department was at first perceived as an intellectual and organizational appendage of the existing clinical departments, it came to be recognized as having the potential of making its own contribution to the theory and practice of medicine. So now we're starting to see this infusion of mindset of, hey, we're not just, docs out there, treating sick people and trying to keep people healthy, but we have an opportunity to shape the influence of how medicine in general is practiced. And that kind of opened the door for now an academic focus for what we did. And they propose that the intellectual basis of family medicine should be the study of family interactions as they affect health and disease. Of course, we've gone well beyond that in terms of our approach. So in July of '73, while the grant was being finalized, they formed a search committee and they met to select a chair for the family practice unit. Okay, not a division, not a department, but a family practice unit. They really still felt that the lack of knowledge of a CHM commitment to developing an actual family practice, dedicated family practice unit, the financial basis for that position or the unit's eventual status as an officer department, none of that was really established. And so they really felt, we'll go ahead and start this search, but we're really not sure that the college is truly on board with all of this. Meanwhile, I didn't know this, and this was such a critical part of how this all comes together. At the time, there was a 4-year private osteopathic college in Pontiac who wanted to align with a publicly funded university. U of M rejected the idea. Wayne State, by just virtue of being quiet on it, essentially rejected it. But our president at the time, John Hanna, was all in. He said, I think that's a great idea. Let's bring the osteopathic college into MSU. It was approved by the state legislature, but in order for that to happen, they required that MSU develop a 4-year allopathic college. But again, up until that time, we were still just a 2-year medical college. So, and it was only with the expansion to a 4-year curriculum that we now have the clinical infrastructure that we could possibly, that the possibility of a Department of Family Medicine could be considered. So that little piece of history was critical to our formation as a department. So back to the mid-70s, in June of '74, Kellogg Foundation awarded $750,000 for the development of the Department of Family Medicine at CHM. And 2 months later, the search committee submitted recommendations to the dean that Roy Gerard be selected as the first chair. And at that time, in 74, we now had these, nine residency programs. So you can see between 1969 and 1974, Saginaw, Midland, Sparrow, Oakwood, Grand Blanc, which interestingly at that time had an MSU affiliation in 72. Grand Rapids, St. John's, Wayne State, and Bon Secour were the 9 that we had at the time. So, and thus began our journey. We're going to invite Bill up to start telling us what happened after we finally got this status established.
And what was the first year of the 4-year CHM college?
Of the 4-year? That's a great question. All I know is that so it was, I think it was 70, it was 73, I think, maybe the year before, 72, 73. When the 4, Bill might know, but I don't know for sure the exact, it was right there in the early, it was about a year or two before the actual formation of the department.
It's 72. Is that right? I think it is.
72.
Because those, alumni, they were on campus a couple of years ago. I started in 74. Yeah. And I was aware that it was really due, because I remember
Right.
asking, I think we're talking.
Yeah.
Like, am I gonna be able to finish all 4 years and they go to.
Now you will.
Now I'm back here.
That's so funny that you were, Dr. Winley, did you?
And so there was like 10 years that the school was a 2-year college, 2-year medical school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where did the students go then for their 3rd and 4th year? Did they mainly stay in Michigan and go to those other 2 schools?
Wayne State and U of M, mostly. They could go anywhere, but most chose to stay in the state. And that was an era in which there was we didn't have remediation. We didn't have all the strategies we have now to help to support students. And there was a fairly meaningful attrition of students after the first 2 years. Because Wayne State and U of M at that time had the same curriculum. It was all basic science first 2 years, clinical second 2 years. And there were a lot of students that got through those first 2 years or didn't get through those first 2 years and said, this is not what I want to do, or they failed or whatever. And so there was never really seemed to be a shortage of clinical opportunities for people to come in here.
And I don't think we had students until 60.
Yeah, it took a few years. One thing that those graduates of that first class told me that I thought was really interesting is that they really had the perception that people were waiting for them to fail. The sense that the other medical schools felt like the funding were better used other places. And so at least their understanding was that 100% of their class had to pass their boards for the institution was basically shut down. And so they viewed it as a mandate to keep the place open with each of them individually during that sort of
I can't imagine that.
right.
In addition to the stress you already feel.
It's gonna shut down.
Right, if you know. I just want to take a moment to introduce Bill Wadland. Bill is the professor and chair and associate dean emeritus in the College of Human Medicine. He was the associate dean for faculty affairs, and he also served as chair of our department. So if you remember the chronology, it was after Roy Gerard, who was our founding chair, but before Dr. Arnett started, and obviously before me. Bill was chair for, was it 17 years? 24 years, really long time to be in that role. So he is going to share some reflections with us. And are you ready? All right.
So, long time, Rachel. And it really is a joy to be here to see all of you. And I would say, I enjoy seeing those that I know. But really, it's a joy to see those that I don't know and all the new faces. I think that's a real testimony to the future of the student. So what I'd like to do, I have been asked to talk about the foundations and role of the department, and to do that in 10 minutes. You know, that's an impossible task. When I started out, I thought I would like to give attributions to everyone through the years that have developed programs. That's also an impossible task because I would wind up not recognizing. So I'm going to focus on programs. And if you help develop one of those programs, those are the building blocks leading to the foundation. If you were a part of that, I want you to take credit. And if you're taking credit today, especially, that program continues. So take some pride and credit. As we know, it's really the people that make the difference. And there are many major contributors who did not be here today. And it's because they've passed on. And some of those have passed on recently, even in the past year. So I'm not going to mention names again, but you can recall those people. And I'd like to just take a few moments of silence and reflection. So think about those people a moment. So we thank them. Gratitude. So 1974, 50 years ago, and there are some of you in this room that have a recollection. I have recollection for 50 years. Where was I 50 years ago? I was a third-year student at an institution where you could not find a family physician. Where was that? The University of Michigan. However, our dean required us in the second year of medical school to hear a guest speaker. His name was Dr. Joseph Fisher. Dr. Fisher was the recent past president of the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians. And he told us about his personal practice over 40 years in Chelsea, Michigan. He talked about the relationships, the comprehensive care. He was very much into biopsychosocial as an important part of his practice. That to me sounded really exciting. I sat there as a third-year student in a big auditorium. He described the new curriculum for family practice and the board certification. So I decided to start a quest during my third and fourth year to train in the best way. So I chose pretty much all of my rotations at Wayne County. If you ever been there, it's incredible. It was a knife and gun club that shows up, the ER, doing obstetrics, pediatrics. They're also at St. Joe Mercy. So I had designed community-based education without even knowing the term. And I should have gone to see a gym. So then I decided that I needed to find the best fit for a residency. And I was looking for one that was really strong in academics, these new concepts of family medicine, legitimate discipline, but also huge exposure to clinical care. Where was that? So as we saw from John, the first early programs, one was Saginaw. So I went over to Saginaw, and who did I interview with? My first interview for residency. Roy Gerard. So Roy came out, I remember exactly the interview, and all he would talk about is I'm going to lead a new department at MSU. And I didn't hear much about the Saginaw program. And so I wished him the best. But then came into the room someone you also know, James O'Brien. And of course, that was a great interview. Jim was the chief resident. He was going to be the interim program director. You know, that seemed to me, okay, this program's really shifting. So then I thought the next program I need to look at, one of the first programs, was Sparrow. So I met with Pat Crow. And anyone who meets Pat Crow, a number of you have, I mean, he came from Missouri, he has this southern view, very focused. But he did make one key point, is that the focus of family medicine training is your practice. It's the patients you are seeing in front of you. So he had the non-rotational model. And I think that model was unique and it really makes a lot of sense. And it's the importance that we learn as we care for people over time. But then I heard there were two students, top students from CHM, John Collins, anyone know of John? Yeah.
I don't know.
So, John Collins and Larry Davis, they were both kind of different. Larry was heading out into the wilderness to practice. John is a natural leader. They looked at 50 programs all over the country. And they wound up in Charleston, South Carolina, which was a department that had been established for 5 years, a lot of money from South Carolina. But you can imagine the amount of clinical care you would see in the Deep South. So I looked at a number of programs and I wound up at Charleston. Now, I'm getting back to CHM. John was headed back to Michigan, became a leader in Grand Rapids. Larry headed out to the wilderness. And Joe Fisher, who was the presenter at U of M from Chelsea, he wound up on the faculty. So there was this big Michigan connection. But probably the most significant, developed close friendship, our families were close, was John Hickner. There was a group of us that wanted to practice together, leaving Charleston, 5 of us. In the middle of the meeting, John announces, I'm going to Escanaba, Michigan, and I'm going to work for MSU and start a teaching rural practice in a new clerkship. So that blew up our group. So from the beginning, I felt like I've had a connection with the College of Human Medicine. I came back to Michigan and practiced in rural medicine. And I kept a close view of this department. And initially, what I observed was that Roy Gerard was the key person for family medicine in the state, by becoming chair of a potential department. He was recognized by the academy. He was recognized by those that he competed against, which was Lou Simone, Pat Crow. I mean, these guys were characters. But Roy became, I would say, the titular head of family medicine, just because the university was going to support the development of a new department. I also recall, why did they choose Roy over the other candidates? And instead of that classic sort of cookie cutter model of the rural family doc that John presented, Roy didn't have that model. His model was a more of adaptive model, a physician that you need, the physician that the community needs. So this is a physician that's willing to learn over time, lifelong learning, and adapt to the needs of that community. That model is really relevant today. I think it was really visionary for Roy, and you see that play out. The other thing that happened with Roy, he was highly valued by the Michigan Academy. I was an early member, and he was really respected And instead of competing with those other program directors, he developed a network, a community network, and connected with those other program directors. He also helped the other universities develop departments. So he was a major collaborator, basically. Now, there was a problem. He really wanted a department. And Andy Hunt, fortunately, had the same vision, the founding dean. But the chairs of medicine and human development wanted to stay a unit, a subunit of pediatrics and human development. Roy would not hear of that. I mean, he was a World War II veteran. And fortunately, Andy Hunt backed that up. Now, there's a story. The original department was housed in the bottom of Fee Hall, in the basement of Fee Hall. That's where we're going to put that unit, the subunit of this sort of quasi-discipline. So the story goes, and this is, I heard it from Gretchen Bria, who was the founding administrator, that Roy noted that the administrative offices in the clinical center were vacant. Somehow the executive director had moved to a seemingly better site. So you know those offices, they actually pulled up stakes out of the basement within a week and declared squatters' rights on that site. Did not ask the dean. And those squatters are still there today. So my perspective, actually as a rural physician, as this department was really getting going, Roy had his vision. But as I practiced and interacted with the department more, it was really clear that Roy was a type of leader that would choose really good people and support them and let them take off. And so here's some of the examples. And I think this is really a test of a true leader. If a true leader eventually becomes the follower of the mentees or the proteges, that's a test of a leader. That you've created an environment where people can take off. So here's some of the examples of those programs. We saw some of that today with Randy's presentation. And the faculty designed their own fellowship in sports medicine. They didn't apply for a fellowship. We're going to make a fellowship and we'll be the fellows. That's pretty creative. You know who those guys were. Okay. Then they actually wrote the textbook and were sort of founders of this discipline of sports medicine. There are also similar curricular programs that developed behavioral medicine, nutrition in the college. Research faculty actually established one of the first community networks. These were community networks with the community campuses. That researcher over time has become one of the most funded NIH researchers in the history of the college. And so I'm not supposed to mention names, but if you want to ask afterwards who that person is. Faculty wrote many educational grants. This Kellogg grant is a really big deal because it launched the department. And the department also established, they realized they had to have a core residency. So establishing St. Lawrence was crucial, and having a tight relationship with St. Lawrence. And many of you have had that connection. And I think it's made a core difference in the department over time. Also, the department wasn't just closed here in East Lansing. It was statewide. There was always this view of welcoming others to interact in the department. So as I said, John Hickner took off to the UP. He established a teaching site, but he also established a research network. So the first primary care research network in rural settings in the United States, UpperNet. Also, one of the faculty who I actually happened to interview when he was a resident joined the department, proud MSU grad, started the Landmark Center for Ethics and Humanities, and is a landmark center today. The practice was also thriving in the clinical center, and they developed advanced practice in palliative care. Faculty developed pivotal programs in student wellness, professionalism, and eventually the virtuous professional for the entire college. In the 80s, I attended the first research day, and it was actually right here. And I didn't know in the future that I would have a lot to do with this department, but I presented a paper on establishing a Department of Family Practice in a rural community hospital. And why is that important? Because most privileges community hospitals were granted by other disciplines. And by having an actual department, family physicians could determine privileges, grant those in their own discipline. I presented that with my hospital administrator, and the coincidence is that same day I had lunch with Gretchen Berea, who was the founding administrator, and years later I was working with her. So moving forward into the 90s, I achieved tenure at the University of Vermont, a very rural focused program, but highly academic. I chose it because it was rural, and that's where my passion is. So in 92, it was a real honor to come back here, come back to Michigan. And it was an honor to come here because in some ways, I knew this whole history. As a resident practicing physician, so it felt great to be back in Michigan. But the question is, okay, what did I actually find when I came here in the department? Well, first of all, what I want to say, I found an incredible staff. Everyone talks about faculty. The staff were magnetic. They had purpose, a sense of joy. And I think their motto was, we work here to make everyone look good. And it was great today. I ran into Lisa, and she told me that, Lisa worked in our clinical center for a number of years. She left, and she just told me she had to come back to family medicine. And I think that's a testimony to who we are, that our staff has a sense of joy working with us and wants to thank you for that. Thank you. So when you look at an academic department or you look at faculty, we always talk about the stool. And I never could figure out why we refer to a stool. There's 3 legs or they have 4 legs, okay? And generally those legs are, it's education, it's service, which is your practice, it's research, scholarship. The last leg, I put a 4th leg on that stool, because otherwise it's kind of unstable, is administration. Okay, so I'm looking at Aaron here. So what about this department? when you measure the actual discipline, how does that stool stand up? And that was the question I had when I sort of came into the department, reflecting on family medicine. So one of the things we did is we changed the name to family medicine back in the 90s. And we developed a full clerkship, which we called family medicine. At first, we were in charge of the introduction to clinical practice across the college. But the next step was that we would develop a true rotation in a discipline. I think that was important to expose the students educationally. We also, with grant support, developed, this is something I feel attached to, because I thought it was crucial, and especially that family medicine did it. We developed a program in critical appraisal analytical medicine, which was the step toward evidence-based medicine. Was required across the entire curriculum. And this was led by family physicians. Also, what had happened is that in the 90s, managed care was very popular. You know, it seemed like all patients were going to have to go through a gatekeeper. What had happened in terms of career choice because of that? Well, a couple years in a row, almost 50% of the class went into family medicine. I remember because I wrote most of the letters. So huge interest in family medicine. We had a formal clerkship. We're leading programs. But also what happened in our clinical practice, we were the #1 practice in Blue Care Network. And David's shaking his head. Well, because of that, we had $1 million in reserves. But I learned actually very quickly, the dean is not always your best friend. $1 million was given to another department to bail them out. I thought,
That
oh.
wasn't
Yes, I can mention, it was Bill Abbott, who actually hired me. However, Gretchen was so shrewd. We figured how to nickel and dime and get all that money back. We actually got support for faculty and programs. Research and scholarship continued to grow with grants. But one year, I just wanted to say, I was so proud. We were the only department to have a faculty member in the college achieve tenure at Michigan State University. That person did have a lot of NIH funding. So what I've talked about is education, scholarship, clinical practice, but there is really another measure. And this is leadership and the contributions of leadership to the college. So I'm just going to list a number of these, and a number of you are sitting here in the room. So we've had administrative leaders, senior associate dean on faculty affairs, associate dean for community affairs, senior associate dean for academic affairs, and the associate dean for undergraduate affairs. Family docs are really good at managing affairs, obviously. So family medicine faculty also become the university physician. That's the physician that advises the president when you have a pandemic, major events. We've had several of our faculty in that role. Also, numerous faculty have become editors, associate editors, national journals, family medicine, Journal of Family Practice, American Family Physician, and the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. I might have forgotten some, but those are major roles, those are national roles. Also major contributors in evidence-based medicine, the poems, the essentials, just-in-time medicine, collaborating with others in other units, tremendous contributions that are ongoing. And as a faculty also, a number of faculty who grew up in the department, so they were mentored in this department. Those faculty have become leaders in national societies, SDFM, ADFM, the double ANC board members, president of the Michigan Academy of Family Physicians. And I would say in the past year, the family physician of the year sitting in the room, David. Also, number of people who have grown up in the department have become chairs in other departments. I'm just going to list the universities. University of Toledo, Indiana University, University of Illinois, University of Louisville, and the University of Nevada, as well as the Cleveland Clinic. So it's pretty self-evident that those foundational pillars are much stronger today than they were in 1970. But Souza asked me a question during the virtual town hall. And he said, Bill, did you ever feel that you had to justify family medicine as a discipline when interacting with other chairs from traditional disciplines? It's a pretty heavy question. It was a virtual town hall. I was on Zoom. So I just punted the question. Pretended like you didn't ask it. Okay. But then it dawned on me, I did. And one of the chairs, bless him, the chair of medicine, Joel Coopersmith, had never been exposed to family medicine. He came from the East Coast. He's a piece of work, yeah. So we used to spar in meetings, and I kind of enjoyed it, this kind of intellectual sparring. But Joel actually got a deanship in Texas, and he was leaving. We were standing in the parking lot behind the clinical center, next to his vintage Porsche. Always loved that car, by the way. And so he looks at me and he says, you know, Bill, I'm going to thank you. I have a much better appreciation for the essential role of family medicine in medical education. Oh, thank you. So tremendous compliment. But I'd say actually the best compliment is actually from Keith English. Keith is now the chair of pediatrics. And you remember what they wanted to do years ago, make it a unit. Dr. English, every time I see him, he says, Bill, I have to thank you for welcoming me here and helping me succeed as a chair. So that's my answer back to Aaron. So in conclusion, I'm going to make a statement. Just as family physicians are foundational in virtual every healthcare system across the country, the Department of Family Medicine in the College of Human Medicine, building on the original vision of 1974, today is no doubt a highly celebrated academic department, essential to the foundation and mission of the College of Human Medicine, Michigan State University, and I will say the future of the discipline of family medicine. So thank you.
I'd like to invite our panelists to go ahead and come up to the front of the room. Remember who you are.
So I was just reflecting when Bill was talking about the challenge of, and then the importance of establishing these departments of family medicine. I left the state for a brief time in 2000, went down to Nashville, Tennessee. And part of my gig down there, Vanderbilt University wanted to bring me on to help to establish some palliative care programs there and to work within the cancer center. Well, in order to work in there, I needed privileges. Vanderbilt in 2000, and still to this day, does not have a department of family medicine. And so they decided they couldn't figure out where to put me. Department of Internal Medicine said, no way are we going to take a family doctor. And so they said, well, they want to turn to oncology because I'm working in the cancer center. And they said, you gotta be joking. And so there was, you talk about sparring, was trying to figure out, we know we want him, we know we need to do this stuff, but we don't have a place for him. And so I think that really just underscores the importance of what you've accomplished here. And you really don't go too many places around this state and not find the anchor of family medicine in so many different places. So it's just a privilege to you. We wanted to convene this panel just to reflect for a moment on the work that they're doing and how the work that they're doing has been built upon some of the pillars, the legs to the stool, if you will, that Bill outlined. And just to take a few moments to reflect, we got folks that have been here for a while and some that have not been here for a long while. So I think we'll start, Wayne, at the end and just share a few of your reflections about your role within the department and how that has been influenced by those that came before.
So, so I'll just start by. All right. Yes, it is working. So I'll just start by saying that, you know, I came into the college in 2016 and actually in the Division of Public Health, and my college affiliation was selected to be family medicine because we could not appoint within the Division of Public Health faculty into positions there. So the mission and vision of family medicine was the most simpatico with clearly the work that I intended to do within the Division of Public Health. And it was really the community-based portion that was so deeply important to me. I became the director of the Master Public Health Program in 2018, and everything that we do, the design point around our curriculum and certainly our accreditation activities were deeply embedded in community-based activities. We try our very best to make sure that the students we train, which we have almost 800 graduates now and about 200 current students, tries to expose them to the notion about the importance of community-based activities. And in fact, my personal view is that we are training our public health students to be individuals that will work in public health and local public health, local and county public health departments, as well as other places around the academy. So the community component is extremely important, and so important in that we were a generalist concentration before, but now we've introduced 2 new concentrations this fall. And one of those is data management, extremely important in community-based settings. And the other one is rural public health. And those 2 new concentrations are intended to increase our reach throughout the state. We have students, 82% of whom are actually in the state of Michigan because we're a fully online asynchronous program. But when I was interim chair of the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health, we also had a stool. And that stool had 3 legs and it was extremely stable. In that, one of the legs was research, the second one was the educational function. And the third very important one was around program, and evaluation. Most of you know, Mona, Hana, and Tisha, but that's the kind of thing that, fits into that third leg. But what actually made, the stool very stable is the connecting ring was community. And all of our activities, research, the implementation, and certainly the educational enterprise involves, community elements. And for us, this is not to demean the administrative, role that Aaron and others play, but, community for us was the ring that connected that. I'll just stop there.
I think it's great, and I think that as we reflect back, I'm just thinking back on the one quote when, I think it was, Dean Hunt had really felt that family medicine could be one of the very first departments that was truly community oriented and set an infrastructure to allow what you were able now to do. So I think that's fantastic. Mark?
Part of my teaching, I teach both family medicine residents, internal medicine residents. And I have to say, it's always a breath of fresh air when I'm teaching the family medicine residents. But that's only equaled by teaching the medical students who are just as capable as the family medicine residents, probably because they don't know much medicine. There was an article in the Lancet when I was a geriatric fellow that was entitled, "There's no such thing as geriatrics and it's here to stay." And the point was there really is no basis for an age-based specialty. It was really focused on chronic illness. And if you look at another article in Lancet in 1946, Marjorie Warren laid out really the role of geriatrics. She didn't mention age, she mentioned chronic illness. In today's language, she would say shorter length of stay in the hospital and also reducing the need for long-term care. And that's really the focus of geriatrics. It started at Michigan State with Dr. O'Brien in family medicine, Dr. Jack Jones in internal medicine, and Dr. Sumi Verma in psychiatry. Dr. O'Brien went to Duke. Dr. Jones went to Edinburgh, Scotland, and Dr. Verma went to Boston College. They came back and started the Senior Health Center. Family medicine has really had a big part of the development of the Senior Health Center. Dr. Wadland helped guide it through many years, but really have focused on the things that you guys do very well, which is talking to people, looking at the psychosocial aspects of their care, and really individualizing care, shared decision making.
Thanks, Mark. Oman?
Can you hear me?
You're fine.
So I'm Oman Al-Sharawi. I joined the department here in 2018. Before that, I was a postdoc in epidemiology, so I have been at MSU for some time. And mainly my responsibility involved research, and I have a little bit of a story behind my research, interest. So I went to I'm originally from Egypt. I went to medical school at Cairo University in Egypt. With only like my purpose for going to medical school is to cure two individuals, my parents. They were patients with a chronic cardiometabolic condition. And I always in my head, I was imagining there's a reversal of everything, and I can go to medical school and I can reverse their chronic conditions. But it didn't work like this, those thoughts were not really realistic. Maybe it was I was 15 years of age at that time. And then there was always we had two channels in Egypt, and there were always the same ad going over and over again. It says the translation is prevention is better than treatment. Prevention is better than treatment. And if they are trying to put a message in my head, it worked really well. So I was after the thought of I cannot reverse the condition, I can at least try to put my mind into prevention and looking at how to prevent a health condition early before it starts. Anything preclinical, pre-diabetes, pre-hypertension. This is where my thoughts were going. I moved to the US for family-related reasons, and research is much easier here on the funding level, because back in Egypt, you have to pay like your salary to fund yourself to conduct research. And I found the discipline of epidemiology. And this is where I thought, okay, this is now like, it's now beyond 2 individuals. I'm going to increase my reach. It worked really well at first, but the problem with epidemiology is that you really don't connect your purpose is to look at the population level, but you really don't connect that well with the population level. Yes, it's bigger, but maybe in my head, it's too big that I see an impact for what I'm doing. And so family medicine was really, like research within family medicine was really, personally, was really a good fit for me, because I felt I'm still doing the bigger impact research, but then I can also translate it into a discipline that look at the like the whole person kind of approach. So it was really a good fit for me. I really enjoy being here, and I know I belong, like my research interest currently, and I'm funded to do cannabis research specifically. And the first day I joined the department, they give me a phone number, and I know like this is my office phone number. I know this is where I belong. My phone number is for the university, 884-0420. So everybody.
That's great. That's perfect. Thank you, Chelsea. One of our newest.
Yeah, definitely one of the newest additions to the department. Let's see, so I started here in August 2023, so I've only been here for a little over a year. But I was a student at MSU CHM, and actually before that, I was a student at MSU. So I bleed green, as they say. And I was thinking back, you know, a lot of my mentors and teachers are in this room, which is very cool now to get to be a part of a department that sort of raised me in a lot of ways. But I was thinking back to my time in medical school and how that impacted my decision to go into family medicine, and then ultimately to come back to MSU. And I remember going into medical school, and I'm sure I said something in my personal statement about going into primary care. During my time in medical school, though, I had a really hard time during my 3rd year because I really liked every single rotation. I even liked surgery. Can you believe that? And by the end, towards the end of my 3rd year, I realized that during my family medicine rotation, I can do a lot of these things in family medicine. And ultimately, obviously, I decided to go into family medicine. I went through the Sparrow residency program. It has a longer name now, I think. But I decided ultimately to come back to MSU because it allows me to do so many of the things that I love, kind of similar to how family medicine lets me do all of the things that I love, which includes teaching students, teaching medical students. I think that is one of the most wonderful things that I get to do at MSU. I also get to work with the residents on the inpatient service, which is great because since I had some of my education there as well, I like having that connection to the residency and continuing to stay in touch with the faculty and residents there. And I get to do research. I actually worked with Omaima during my residency to help with some of her cannabis research. And so being a part of this department is not only special to me because I was taught by so many people who are in this room, but because now it's kind of come full circle and I get to teach the medical students, teach the residents, and do a lot of the things that I love to do in clinic. So it's been great.
Thanks, Jen. So really, what I think so beautiful about this is we see this wonderful continuum from practicing on an individual basis to practicing on a community basis, making people healthier, making communities healthier, and the research and infrastructure to help to educate and study everything in between, all as a result of what we as a department have been able to do, which I think is pretty damn phenomenal. So anyway, thank you. Julie?
I,
You don't need them anymore, do you?
I don't think so.
Well, at least not at this moment.
I have so many things in my head, it's like it's bursting, you know, like I just, it's very exciting, and I'm like kind of overwhelmed by how many stories I could tell. And just memories that are here in this space, and excitement. The people who interviewed me for my first job are sitting here in this room. I was very pregnant with my daughter, who's now 17, and Robin and I were remembering earlier that I think the first picnic we went to, we had these little tiny babies there, and now they're going to college, which is sad, but also wonderful. And I remember when Bill said to me, you should get to know Robin. I think you would really like Robin. So I had in my head, the first social event I went to in the department, that I had to find her because she was going to be my friend. And that turned out to be true. And I've been thinking a lot about like all these little arrows and connections in the past that often were ideas that people had that have come true and been real, and how many of the things that we that were in the hearts and minds of those people, really starting in the 60s, but certainly with the founding of the department in 1974, that are still here with us today, you know, they're still real. Certainly our connections to communities and residency programs is really important and strong, and a big part of our community now. We still have an affiliated network of residency programs around the state of Michigan who gather together to share ideas and best practices and experience faculty development and learn from one another. And Molly is not in the room today because I think she's at a public health conference, but I just wanted to acknowledge that work. And we're also kind of in the process of revitalizing our community-based research network, which is really exciting. And Dr. Zamani Hank, who's only been with us for a couple of years, but has done just a great job of really focusing on that. We still have an amazing clerkship, which educates students every year in family medicine so that they get some core-based training in family medicine all around the state of Michigan. We have a clerkship in every community. We have a clerkship director in every community, which is pretty unusual. Like I really believe that we have done a good job in not just having students in places, but in also investing in places and in the leadership there and the development of folks there. And this department has been really important too in helping community-based faculty or faculty who are not employed by the university to advance in promotion and to attain full professor in some cases, which has been exciting and fun to see. When I first started as a faculty member, I remember the expansion of the college was under some like duress, and there was a lot of worry about it, right? Like there was a lot of fear about the site in Grand Rapids and the investment that was going into that. And people in Lansing were worried that that would take away from what we have here. But in truth, I think it's just been additive. You know, our connections with our communities and our far reach have really been a strength for us and continue to be a strength. And as remote work has made it more possible for us to employ people who are living further away and getting more connected to those Michigan communities by virtue of where they live, which has been exciting and fun to see. We have the premier rural medical education program in the country. And I'm so glad, Andrea, that you came here. I know that you don't belong to the department, you belong to the college, but you still belong to the department. So I know, yeah. I was thinking about governance structure, but I think of the rural program as a family medicine program in my heart because you are leading it so well, but also because so many people who are really essential and immersed in that rural education are family doctors, right? And in many ways, not just in many ways, in reality, the strong community-based primary care outcomes of the college in terms of graduating large numbers of physicians who practice primary care and who practice in communities and who practice in underserved communities is a reflection of our department and the teaching that we provide and that strong ethos that we have that is really centered on communities and service. And Our dean has really been challenging us to think about health equity as we think about the mission of the college. And I strongly believe we are very well positioned to make an excellent contribution to that effort. I wanted to talk for a moment with you about research. I reflected a lot on where I wanted sort of the call for funding for today to be and where I wanted to focus it. And I decided that I wanted to ask you to consider supporting research in the Department of Family Medicine, because there are so many things we are doing that I think are really powerful and right on the edge of becoming even more impactful. So I want to give you a couple examples, okay? So we heard from Natasha this morning, Natasha Cunningham, who studies pain in children, and really has a strong focus on improving the life trajectory of those kids by helping them to have more positive experiences and stay in school, and helping us to be better at interacting with them and coaching them through pain experiences. Masako Morishita is not here today, but Masako is doing some interesting things around lead poisoning. She's putting air filters in people's houses to try to reduce lead exposure, and the gap between when a family determines that they have lead exposure in their home and the time when they can actually remediate the lead paint, which is kind of an expensive process and takes a lot of time. And she's finding that those air filters actually reduce lead exposure, which has a long-term impact on the health of children, right? There's kind of a neat thing happening between, like, at the intersection of research and education around opioid use disorder right now. And Harland is partnering with a researcher in OBGYN, Kara Poland, to try to build a curriculum for medication-assisted treatment for opioid use disorder that will be for every student who takes our clerkship, so that all students will be equipped for this and to be prepared to address this really big public health challenge as they go out into the world. But, you know, the research that we do, because it's in communities, in some ways that makes it more difficult. If you work with a community hospital, there's more administrative hurdles to overcome. The IRB is complicated, staff access is complicated, managing data is more difficult. And you have to really do a lot of listening. You know, there's often like a qualitative component, which takes time. And there's a real need to really build partnerships with communities, which takes time. And so in some ways that research and scholarship takes more investment. And so my challenge for you today, if you're thinking about giving, especially as we get toward the end of the year, to think about giving that would support research in our department and the powerful things that we're doing. And honestly, like, I just have so much gratitude for this room. I am looking out at you and thinking of people that I have taught sometimes since they were students, but also people who taught me. And I'm kind of at the age where like the old people think I'm young, but the young people think I'm old, you know, like I'm right in that middle spot. And I'm old enough to remember some of the stories. I wasn't here when the department was founded, but I know some of those stories, and I know how much like grit and determination and sense of our own value that we bring to that, right? Like it takes some guts to go to the clinical center and just decide that you're going to be in that space like Roy did. And I'm still sitting there, right? Like my office is still there in that space, and our foundations and our history are so important to who we are. And I hope that you take some of that with you today, especially in a world where we are doing so many different things in so many different places. It can be really easy to get kind of isolated in your own team. But remember, like, you are part of this great department that is doing great things, and everything you do that advances the mission of the college is an important and valuable piece that reflects on that history. So I'm going to invite Dr. Souza to come up and close our session. Oh, but before that, I do want to just acknowledge, I'm sorry, Erin, you can keep walking. I just want to acknowledge particularly the faculty and staff who really contributed to helping me put this together today. Dave Walsworth was actually really instrumental and helpful in helping me figure out how to get CME for it. Brenda Lippincott, I don't think they're even in the room, but Brenda Lippincott, Lisa Crows, were really important in planning. And Jim Brinker is doing all of our recording, has done all the photography. And Louisa also agreed to give up her Sunday to come and support us today. So I really thank them. And Bethany, of course, you know, is the secret brains behind everything, right? She couldn't be here today because she's on vacation, but she also was really helpful in putting this together. So can I have a little round of applause for that? Great, thank you. And now I'll hand it off to Dr. Souza.
Oh, wait.
John. First of all, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit today. This is great. It's wonderful. Difficult to imagine seeing so many people on a Sunday afternoon. And I think it says so much about the dedication and the love that you have for each other and for this department and how important that is. And I have some people to thank. I want to thank Julie. She stepped into the breach in a moment that was not so easy. And John, who helped get us to a place where it was possible. Every department has its ebbs and flows. And so, and I feel so good about where this department is now, right? As a dean and as a generalist. And I want to say just how much I appreciate your leadership and how much confidence I have in you and your people. And I want to thank some people who may or may not realize what a big impact they had on me, since we're here sharing. So people like Bill, who not only was a chair, but associate dean at a point in 2005 when I wandered into East PU 116, as like, who in the world would pick somebody that young to be an associate dean? And Mark, who is my attending. No, and I learned a lot from Mark about taking care of patients, and in particular, when he was frustrated with the way our service ran, what dedication to patients looks like and what it means. And Henry. I remember I went to Indiana University. I was the first in 95. I was the first third-year class to do a family medicine rotation. So that shows you the 20-year difference, right, between MSU and Indiana. And it was their first rotation. Like, there wasn't that much there, right? It was disorganized. There was not a lot of intellectual content beyond seeing patients. And I came here, I remember as a maybe first year faculty member, I came to an event here. It was you and Mark Abel and somebody from, you guys were working on evidence-based medicine. Swanson, did I have that right? Swanson. And I remember realizing that the intellectual oomph at the college was in this department. That the people who were thinking most about what needed to happen in medicine were in family medicine, which was, of course, not what I had grown up with, right, at another medical school. And I thought that was astonishing and wonderful. And Henry and Mark and the people that he was with that worked on those projects, I think that work, that intellectual piece of not only thinking about practice and what that means in terms of what we all need, but then how it shapes practice in general, right? In whether it's essential evidence or the democratization of data, which is what it really represents, right? First, from the only people who know how to say anything about cardiology are cardiologists. Then as we make data more available, then the generalists have something good to say about what happens, and then patients can actually understand what's happening, right? That small d democratization of data and evidence is an important movement in our country and the health of our people. And I really think that Henry and Mark and those folks were really so important to that. Which is where I turn maybe toward the future and what we get to think about. When I first went to Marquette and saw the importance of what a community engaged faculty could mean in a community. And then as we created the campuses in Traverse City, see David here, in Midland, which has been a real stalwart for this department and family medicine in the state in general. The place of engaging with community and all the parts of our work, right? Which, you know, Julie and Andrea have thought so deeply about in their own scholarship. So many of you work on the work on community networks and your collaborations across the college. That is the place where we get to excel. That is a place that we, like very few institutions, have the ability to make a real difference in the practice of medicine and the health of people. It's part of my interest in health equity. It's part of my interest in dry bench research. It's a part of my interest in what I think can differentiate this college. And I think you guys are and you are all at the nexus of that. It's how we figure out how to do that, right? And at the end of that is public intellectual work and community engagement. It's how we convince our fellow citizens that we care about what happens to rural populations, just like we care about any other group of populations, that people who think they have been left behind or left out realize that academics and universities and medicine in general and our society cares about everybody. And as we think about that more broadly, whether you're an immigrant or you've been left behind or don't see in our institutions somebody who looks, sounds like, or comes from a place where you do, that we really are here for the public good, to make the world a better, safer, more sanative place for all of us. And I think this department is so special for that future work. So I want to thank you all for that opportunity, for your energy and dedication, for being a part of the college, and for the inspiration and example that this department provides. So thank you.